the end of it all, there's not much to do other than pity the heroine of this tale. Welcome, my Mere Mortalites, to another round of the Mere Mortals book reviews. My name is Kyron, host of the Mere Mortals podcast, but also this one where I dive deeper into the books that I'm reading to give you the juicy information, a summary, a theme, a synopsis, some takeaways, and indeed we do have some sad themes, some haunting themes from today. It is Tess of the Durbeyfields by Thomas Hardy. So this book was published in 1891 and is about 480 pages in length if you include the notes and introductions and things like that, and probably took me about 8 hours to get through in total. It's a realistic tale of a continually unfortunate country girl set in Victorian England, so about the 1800s period, if you want to think of it that way. Her name is Tess Durbeyfield, and she's a milkmaid from a very poor family. And basically, she finds out she has some ancestral people living in the valley over, the Durbeyfields, which her name is kind of a derivation of. And she goes there. She basically gets wronged by this guy called Alec Durbeyfield, who's a 26-year-old wealthy landowner somewhat. And, some unfortunate things happen and she has to continue on with her life. She meets another man later on called Angel Clare, who she falls in love with, and he's a gentleman and she gets treated right by him. But once again, there's just these continual mishaps, these misfortunes that befall her, ultimately ending up into a very sad kind of love triangle with a very, very tragic end. So what will you find in this book? Well, many a theme occurs in. There's poverty, there's love, there's religion, there's morality, there's purity, there's sex, there's class divides, there's education. All of these are somewhat melded together, and it's the morality of love, it's the morality of religion and things like this which occur. So the book itself is very poetic. Thomas Hardy was somewhat of a poet as well, and so a lot of the descriptions, the languages are about the fields, the valleys, the rivers, the ancestral homes, all of this, the inner emotions, the tears rolling down the cheeks and whatnot. He's very, very descriptive with his language, and although the book is fictional, it's kind of based on realistic places as well. So Wessex, the county, a lot of the actual locations are related to places. They end up going to Stonehenge at one point, which is a real location. So it's kind of this melding of the realistic with made up places, but also realistic somewhat as well. Now, there's 7 phases that the book goes through, and I guess you could call these the chapters if you want. So we have phase the first, the maiden; phase the second, maiden no more; phase the third, the rally; phase the fourth, the consequence; phase the fifth, the woman pays; phase the sixth, the convent; and phase the seventh, fulfillment. So really does kind of play on these religious themes even with the chapters as we hear it there. I'm going to talk a little bit about Thomas Hardy. Who is he? Why is this book somewhat interesting or important? Well, he was a middle-class writer, and as I mentioned, he published in 1891, so he was born in the mid-1800s. And he was very aware of class divisions. He was somewhat educated, but didn't get a university education, and he wrote a lot on themes and concepts related to this Victorian age, and in particular, fighting against them, or at least writing critical pieces that brought it to the public consciousness. So this is around education, around sex, around morality, around religion and class divides, things like that. This book, as many, Tess of the Durbeyfields, was very hard to publish, so it got published in installments. There was a lot of alterations and different things he had to write or had to cut out, and then in later versions he could put them in. And so it depends on which version you have. I believe I have the 1974 published version by, what was this called? The New Wessex edition, published by Macmillan, London, Ltd, 1974. So that is the version that I have in particular. I'm going to jump onto the first theme now, which is misfortune, fates that can be worse than death. And so if you had to describe the life of Tess, you would just say hardship. From beginning to end, it is just a series of just mishaps. She was born into poverty. Her parents were, uneducated, making bad decisions, drunkards / not caring / having, 7 children, that sort of deal. When she goes to this ancestral home, it's not particularly implied, but you can see basically she was raped, and if not, it's very hard to put a charitable spin on what happened to her. A high level of coercion, of unwilling coercion, let's just put it that way. She's worked to the bone in these fields afterwards, doing this very hard work, getting out Swedes from the frozen ground, continually putting, I believe it was wheat or chaff into this machine, which would grind it up or bundle it. It was kind of hard to know exactly. Humiliated, despised by many a people, and ultimately killed. And so every time that she gets these little brief moments of joy, when she was a youngster and dancing in this field, she has this beauty about her which attracts people in, but it's kind of attracting the wrong type of people in many a way. And when she goes to this dairy farm and she meets Angel for the first time, she has this kind of wondrous, almost utopic type of deal going on there. But once again, this must end. The seasons change and life must go on. And each of these is just a taster for more misery that is to come. So her main misfortune, I think, is she has something happen to her which just can't be forgotten, which is basically losing her virginity, not to her husband. And so she's kind of an unmarried woman who's had sex. This is, in Victorian England, a big no-no and basically reasons for social outcasting, no matter your level of class. And so her luck, I guess, if you call it in that, or unluck, was she couldn't forgive this of herself, her husband couldn't forgive it, and society couldn't forgive it. And there was just this real lack of care, or wouldn't be able to forgive her. And so we see this on page 284, where she's just married Angel, and they kind of confess to each other. He slept around when he had this little phase, and then she's like, "Look, I basically had this incident occur to me. Once again, we're not really sure if it's a rape or not, but she says basically, I've lost my virginity." And so we go to this section here. So she broke into sobs and turned her back to him. It would almost have won round any man but Angel Clare. Within the remote depths of his constitution, so gentle and affectionate as he was in general, there lay hidden a hard, logical deposit, like a vein of metal in a soft loam, which turned the edge of everything that attempted to traverse it. It had blocked his acceptance of the church, it blocked his acceptance of Tess. Moreover, his affection itself was less fire than radiance, and with regard to the other sex, when he ceased to believe, he ceased to follow, contrasting with many impressionable natures who remained sensuously infatuated with what they intellectually despise. He waited till her sobbing ceased. And then he goes on to basically say, like, I still respect, you're a respectable woman, but I can't accept you kind of out of principle. And this principle being, he needs an unsullied virgin wife, essentially. And this is where we're getting into these, like, what is it that makes up misfortune? What are the big factors and big decisions that are made by people? And so we see in the big factors, most of it is kind of coming from things outside of people's control. So in Tessa's case, this is her just poverty and the size of her family. And in Angel's case, it's the societal expectations. He had a pastor as a father. Both of his brothers are pastors. He's kind of expected to go down this route. And both of them, I think, make decisions that were roughly the right ones. She cared a lot about her family, and so she made decisions where she was trying to provide for them. He made decisions to defy societal expectations in what he thought was the right thing to do. In this case, it is to not go into the church and kind of distance himself from religion, and to, by and large, defy society expectations. He has contempt for ancestral names and respect that hasn't been earned or by a person or by their morality, and is instead of an institution or something like that. So we see in the large part, they make the right decisions. Their misfortune on the big factors are not due to them not caring about their family, or selling their soul just to appease their father, or things like this. No, they make the right ones. And then you can analyze these small decisions that happen where Tess, for example, if she had held or loosened her pride, she could have had better outcomes. So in one case, if she'd held on to her pride and said, you know what, I'm not going to go to the Durbeyfields to beg them for money, she would have never met Alec and she would have never been raped. And on the other case, if she'd loosened her pride later on in the novel and she'd gone to the Clares, to her husband's family, and basically said, look, I'm destitute. This is what happened to me. Can you help me? And we would have seen, oh, yes, they would have been able to help her and she would have had a much more happier ending. Presumably, we can't predict the future. On Claire's part, we also see, as I just mentioned from that page 284, when he's kind of hardened his heart against her and he's following this ingrained thing which he hasn't examined, which is, I need to have an unsullied wife. It's almost like he doesn't care about the circumstances. He doesn't care that, it wasn't her fault. She did everything she could to push away this Alec person who she had no love for, who she despised, and yet a bad thing happened to her. He had no compassion, no pity for that. There was no understanding on his part, even though he had broken other societal expectations related to the church and education and class divisions and things like this. So you can see on the big factors they did the right thing, I'd say, but on these very small ones, it's like, yeah, okay, well, it would have been good if she'd done this or if he'd done that. Perhaps things would have changed differently, but they're such minor decisions in the grand scheme of their lives. Which is getting on to the second theme now, which is injustice. And I put this, the intolerable sorrow. So on balance, you would say they both were both good people. They both lived lives and that they were both relatively hard done by, but especially Tess, because this book is centered upon her. So we see that she is driven just further and further into desperation by her circumstances, and there is this feeling of injustice about it. And so coming on to the top of page 405, she's basically being recourted by Alec de Durbeyfield when he finds her again and kind of falls in love with her beauty and wants her for himself, even though he's, a jackass and arrogant piece of shit. And she's working herself to the bone, just trying to provide for herself and somewhat for her family. And she writes a letter to her husband who's gone overseas to Brazil, and kind of out of shun for her, just to get away from her because he doesn't want to see her anymore, this sort of deal. And so coming to this section, never in her life, she could swear it from the bottom of her soul, had she ever intended to do wrong. Yet these hard judgments had come. Whatever her sins, they were not sins of intention, but of inadvertence. And why should she have been punished so persistently? She passionately seized the first piece of paper that came to hand and scribbled the following lines. Oh, why have you treated me so monstrously, Angel? I do not deserve it. I have thought it all over carefully, and I can never, never forgive you. You know that I did not intend to wrong you. Why have you wronged me? You are cruel, cruel indeed. I will try to forget you. It is all injustice I have received at your hands. T. So she brings up this word injustice. She has indeed, to her utmost, tried to be the best person, and from what we read in the book and the way she's presented, you go, yeah, she was by and large a righteous person. She wasn't trying to harm people. Every opportunity she had to do good to others, she did do good. And yet it is just blow by blow, bam, 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 continually happening to her. And it seems to be a spiral as well. Once the injustice occurs, it's kind of like, that's the way the universe works. You've had a little taste of some injustice here. How about you try this on for size? And we just see this, even though she's so relatively young. I think she gets to the age of about 20 in the book. It doesn't stop, and it's just continual. And this is somewhat of a recurring theme in the Age of Alexander by Plutarch that I did a book review on not too long ago. We did see this as well. Bad things can happen to good people. There is no, just because you are because you have good intentions, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to have a good life. And I mean, what do you take from this? How can you change this? What can you take away? I don't think anyone particularly wants to be the martyr. So this is that idea of being that person who takes the injustice all upon themselves, that kind of Christ-like depiction, or that analogy where one person takes the sins of the entire world, that sort of deal. I think by and large people don't want that, but yet it's almost like the highlighting of martyrs is the answer. So Hardy, for example, in what he did, and I don't know the historical context really deeply, but it did seem that his works contributed to the changing of Victorian England. There is a reason we don't have Victorian England morals today here in Australia, an offshoot of England, and we did at one point. And that's because people like Hardy would write these tales of someone who's been done so severely wrong, just like Tess has, and we see, whatever our thoughts are, what do you make of this tale, of this exception? And the reason this book is so popular and he became a very well-known writer is because there's elements of truth to this. It's fictional, yet there's nothing in this tale that is unbelievable. It's very straightforward, and you go, I can see those series of events happening, or something similar to that. Does she deserve to be shunned and punished and have this ultimate this death, being executed for killing Alec? Spoiler alert. Does she deserve the balance of her life? Did she deserve this? And you go, no, that's really fucked up. And yet, that is what the societal expectations, the morality of the time was. And so it seems like the highlighting is the way to get around these things, or at least that's the answer to injustice, and perhaps some laws and things like that, but that's not particularly part of this book. So let's get on to my own observations and takeaways. Well, the writing for this is just beautiful. I'm going to jump to page 131 now, and this is where she's pregnant and gives birth to a baby by Alec from that rape that occurred. And she's gone back to her own hometown, and she's kind of, given birth to this baby, and yet the baby is rather sickly and it's not doing so good. And so we get to the point where, unfortunately, the child has passed away, and the child's name is Sorrow. And so passed away Sorrow the undesired, that intrusive creature, that bastard gift of shameless nature, who respects not the social law, a waif to whom eternal time had been a matter of days merely, who knew not that such things as years and centuries ever were, to whom the cottage interior was the universe, the week's weather climate, newborn babyhood human existence, and the instinct to suck human knowledge. I don't know, there's many a passage in this where I read things like that, and it cuts to the bone. You just go, damn it, fuck. This poor baby, never had a chance, never would have a chance. Even if it grew up, the chances of it having a nice life were just going to be, the odds were not in its favor. A poverty-stricken mother with a large family of siblings. He's born out of wedlock to a mysterious father who is, even if he was a good, a gentleman, he's a bad person, and do you want a bad person as your father? That sort of deal. Throughout this book, you find yourself rooting for Tess. You're like, come on, just get a break. She's gotten to this dairymaid, and she's going to marry Angel. Oh, okay, this is beautiful. Like, please, just make it happen. And yet, 20 pages further on, you see the coming. Oh shit! Like, it's going to get worse for her again. A small little break, or perhaps she can, get help from her husband's family whilst he's in Brazil, and whilst she's going through this incredible hardship. She goes to them, and then just before she enters, they're away, and then she encounters their siblings or the part of the family, and they're making fun of her husband or her, and it would cast a really bad light on her husband. She does all these right things, and it's just blow, and you can't help but empathize with her and just go, this is so fucked up. And it makes you sad. Like, reading this book will not put you in an uplifting mood, because a good person has wrong done to them, and many a wrong done to them. So on to the beauty and what, part of this comes from, I guess, the techniques in the book. So he does use a fair amount of quotes from Shakespeare to illustrate a point, of poetry, of even biblical quotes and things like that. And so the notes section that I had at the end of this version, I found very helpful because many words in particular are from that 1800 period where it's a rural terminology related to cutting or milking or a piece of machinery or a common expression from that day and age. So it's very helpful to have a notes section, and I would highly recommend finding a version which does have a notes section because I found it rather invaluable. So in summary, it's a brilliant but ultimately hauntingly sad tale. Every break Tess gets just seems to punish her further by having this contrast of a nice blissful time followed by a year of agony. The blame for a misfortune is rather mixed across people, herself, her husband, Alec, and across society itself. But I don't think there's any doubt that an injustice has been done. And what can you do from this? There's nothing really to do, but perhaps for you as a listener or as the reader at home to ponder about maybe some of your own moral precepts and why you hold this thing. And it could be something related to virginity or whatnot. And examine that. And I would just say in general, err on the side of compassion. So if you do encounter someone like Tess who has been raped and whatnot, probably erring on the side of compassion, no matter your views on virginity or whatever it may be. I just think that's a good general strategy because injustice does occur in this planet, in this day and age, in the 1800s, and most likely will continue to occur for the future. And there's not much to do apart from highlighting it and showing some compassion. So overall, Test of the Durbeyfields by Thomas Hardy. I'm going to give it a very solid 7.5 out of 10. I definitely would recommend reading it, but maybe not do it if you're in a bit of a bad mood because it's sad. It's a sad tale. And so that is it for today. My mere mortalites, thank you for joining me to this part of the book review of this video. What are your thoughts on Tess of the Durbeyfields, on Thomas Hardy, on the themes of misfortune and justice? I'd love to know all of these things. The easiest way, of course, is to leave a comment down below. But I would also love it if you checked out the Mere Mortals book reviews in the audio format. And this is where there's an interactive element where you can send in some comments with a section, a portion of Bitcoin attached. And I read these out on the end of month book recaps as a thank you for those who are supporting the podcast. There are many ways you can support. You could share this with a friend who also enjoys books or wants to perhaps have a know what type of books they would enjoy. There are many on this channel, so you could send them that way. If I have got any points wrong related to the life of Thomas Hardy or perhaps additional details related to Victorian era morality and things like that, reaching out to me, letting me know that. If I'm having any audio equipment, anything you'd love to see added to the book reviews, all of those I would love to know. And reaching out whatever way you want to do that. And then, of course, the monetary side of things and checking out the Mere Mortals podcast, because many of the things that I do in here, I talk about there with my friend. And so if you want to know some more expansions upon this topic, I would highly recommend checking that out, the Mere Mortals podcast. So that is it for today. I really do hope you're having a fantastic day, wherever they be in in the world, in Victorian England. And until the next time, ciao for now.